It's preparing. Can you hear me still, Jim?
Yep, I can hear you fine.
Good. Okay. It's setting it up right now.
It says live on YouTube.
We are live on YouTube. All right. So I'm here today with Jim Majors, who on Twitter is called the Jim Majors, just so we don't confuse him with another Jim Majors. He is the Jim Majors. And Jim is the former CEO of the Atheist Republic. And right now he's the vice president of Philosophical Atheists. And today we're going to cover a super exciting topic. We're going to talk about Jesus's historicity. And Jim and I, fortunately, though we differ on some aspects of Jesus, he and I have the same opinion on the fact that Jesus is an historical figure. So we're on the same page as far as that. So we're just going to open it up to a nice dialogue. And I want to say thank you, everyone, for coming. And I'm going to go ahead and I do want to tweet out this link and get some attention to it. But Jim, would you like to share with us a little bit of information about yourself, such as where you can find you? And I'm going to put all kinds of links in the chat,
Sure.
right into the description.
My name's Jim Majors. I'm an ex-Pentecostal pastor, in fact, and I'm currently an atheist, still a lover of the Bible, and I love to discuss all things Bible. You can find me on Twitter at the Jim Majors, like SJ said. You can find me on YouTube at youtube.com/Jim Majors. I don't think I put the Jim Majors. I think it's just Jim Majors in YouTube, but it has to be the Jim Majors in Twitter, just in case there's confusion.
Yeah,
but yeah,
that's good. And you have goats. So
yes, I have baby goats. One of my female goats had baby goats this morning, but I have many animals. I stopped calling it a farm, and now I'm borderline thinking about calling it a zoo.
Yeah. What other animals do you have besides goats?
Oh, geez. I have alpacas, horses, donkeys, chickens, dogs, cats, of course. I know I'm missing some pigs. I'm missing something. And one of them are going to have their feelings hurt.
That's an awful lot of animals all I have is one little dog. So I don't even have fish anymore. I used to have fish, and then the tank started getting kind of dirty. I was cleaning it, and then the last fish died, and that was it.
Right. And those little dogs can be kind of needy.
Oh yeah, she's very needy. She's right now just taking a nap right behind me. So she's
giving you a break.
Yeah. I took her on her walk today. She walked me, I should say. That's usually how it works in our neighborhood. So okay. So you and I, let me ask you this: how were you? And I don't know that much about your background, but I do know that you're involved in these atheist organizations. So I know where you're standing now on religion and faith. But how did you come to your beliefs that you have? How did you, because I think you said one time that you were raised a Christian.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I was raised Pentecostal, and it was just realized as a younger teenager that after studying the Bible on out of my own will to study the Bible, I realized that the God that I was being taught about in church every Sunday and Wednesday wasn't the God of the Bible that I was learning about. And so then I decided that I needed to open myself up to a lot more things, and to admit to myself, wow, maybe I don't know the Bible as well as I think I do. I really, if I'm going to hold this to be true, I need to know why I believe it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I'm trying to change the title here really quickly. So give me 1 second.
Sure.
I'm going to say interview with Jim Majors.
Jim
Majors.
That's about all I got, SJ. I can't stall them for you.
Okay, no worries. I've got it all down here right now. Sweet. Okay, now he's got to get some attention. All right, so good stuff. So that's pretty neat. So yeah, so you decided that you were looking at the Bible and you walked away. And about what age were you when that happened?
About 14 is whenever I decided that I didn't know who God was and that I wanted to know who God was.
Okay, and so you went and looked and you felt like you didn't feel like you had the answer, or God didn't give you any signs, if you want to put it that way, maybe, if you were looking at that time.
Right. I believe, of course, that the Bible was God's divinely revealed word, and that it was good for instruction, and it was good for teaching, and that and I believe that I could glean truth from the book, from the Bible. And so I decided that the the best way for me to know who God was, since God wasn't giving me any personal revelation, was to learn the Bible.
That's good. That's good. So you and I had different paths in a way, and kind of similar in one way, because I left the Christian church. I left the Catholic church in my 20s, and I was gone for a long time. And then I came back and sort of had all these epiphanies and revelations, and it wasn't until my early 40s. So it's been it's just interesting. So so I'm really excited to be back, but I was gone for a while thinking that Jesus didn't resurrect, and that all these other faiths were maybe even more true. I was thinking a lot of that for a long time. So so I can relate to that. So if we had to say, one of the things I saw you debating, or I saw a very lively chat on Twitter between you and a couple of people who basically think that Jesus is a myth. And you are putting out a pretty strong case and saying, well, which scholars do you would support that opinion? And of course, they go to the go-tos like Robert Price or Richard Carrier. And I don't know of any other scholars holding academic positions in full-time tenured positions who hold the position that Jesus is just merely a myth. And maybe there are someone might argue that, well, maybe they just don't come out. It's sort of, they want to stay in the closet. They don't want to reveal that. But so would you say?
I mean, sure. I mean, there could be, but you mentioned Robert Price. I know Robert Price. Robert Price has said both in his text and in person that he acknowledges that he is in the minority when it comes to his view, his holding that Jesus probably didn't exist. He acknowledges and admits that the vast majority, and I'm talking about like the amount of flat earthers in the community, the amount of people who believe in Bigfoot, the amount of people, I mean, like, that's the kind of stuff we're talking about.
I like that comparison to the flat earther, Bigfoot, Loch Ness
monster.
And
unfortunately, it's no exaggeration.
Yeah, I think once you do look into the history, I think you have to admit, if you go back and you say, who is the man who inspired this, or who is the originator of this faith? And so to say that no one was around, or that he was carved out of a bunch of different aspects were carved out and given a composite sort of figure, then I think that doesn't do the faith fair, because you have, again, millions of people worshiping in the first few hundred years based on something.
Right. But I don't think that the foundation of that belief necessitates that it has a supernatural foundation. Most scholars believe on a few things that are really easy to admit to for anybody. You know, you don't have to admit to the supernatural or admit that God is real to admit that Jesus existed.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So I wonder if we should get into I don't know if we should go into this or not. Do you want to talk about why I think that Jesus is divine? Do you want to get into that conversation, or should we just offer maybe more historical reasons why people should not reject
I think we
that?
should offer some stuff for his existence, because divinity is something that we, I guess, would do after we establish first existence.
Okay, that's fair enough. So I was listening to Adam Friended not too long ago. He was on this thing on his Think Club, and he was talking to Tim O'Neill. And Tim O'Neill basically pointed out the fact that the origins of Christianity is one reason that you would want to support it. And other reasons in just looking at the history, if you actually try to trace back the history and look at the cumulative case basically for his existence, I think that's pretty fair.
Yeah, I watched that video. I really enjoyed that video. And there, I mean, nothing that I really disagreed with, nothing to the point that I can say, hey, that's wrong, you know?
Yeah. So I watched that video too, and been spending probably too much time watching videos. But yeah, so you could go back to that. I think another thing that we could look at is you just look at the early disciples and what their testimonies were. And if you go into that, then you ask yourself, well, what was the motivation for these people to craft a story that it's just a mere myth? Because they were willing to, and I know you're going to say, well, willingness doesn't necessarily mean anything, but they were certainly believing what they were saying, and they were willing to die for it. So I think that makes a pretty strong case that this is there are multiple attestations coming from different sources and different places. And we even have the extra biblical support outside of the Bible from even hostile people like Tacitus. So.
Yeah. So I just to go back what you were talking about just real quick with the apostles. I think that you should use that argument later. I honestly feel like there are much more compelling arguments or better arguments, because I mean you have to admit, I mean even you admit that three, maybe four best out of the apostles we can say definitively were killed. So I mean I think the best argument, like you were talking about, you said Tacitus there at the end. I think Tacitus and Josephus are the two best pieces of evidence. Simply because they are independent. You have one Jewish, one Roman historian writing within what we would consider contemporary for that time, even though they weren't contemporaries. But and while we do have a problem with some interpolation in the text, the modern scholarly consensus is that Jesus is in there, and he's mythologized later by the interpolations. But the fact of the matter is that Josephus and Tacitus do record a historical Jesus.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that's plus there are a few other people like Suetonius and Pliny the Younger reporting various aspects that are in the New Testament. So we have enough support to I think make a pretty good case that yes, there was a man who was called Jesus who started a movement called Christianity around the year right around the 30s, basically. So
yeah, I would say that he's somebody who was, for sure, the modern scholarly consensus is that he was baptized by John the Baptist. I believe that. I believe that he led a band of followers around southern Judea in the first century. I believe that he preached something that could be considered of the apocalyptic genre, I guess. And that he was killed by Pontius Pilate. He was executed by Roman rule for his claim that he was the king of the Jews.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I wanted to go back to that because you just reminded me of something with your mentioning of John the Baptist. I asked you when we were offline, I said, now why of all of the stories that we have, why is that one that you would believe in? And you said, you want to say what you said?
Yeah. So, I mean, well, for one, it's it fits what they would call a criterion of embarrassment. In other words, it's not something that they would really want to admit to, Jesus being baptized by somebody else, basically submitting to somebody else's authority. And then he started his ministry from there.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think that actually was the other point that Tim O'Neill brought up to Adam Friended on Think Club. He brought up the fact that there's some embarrassing stuff that's in the books. And so he said that offered some support for historicity.
Right. But I don't think we can rely upon that alone, right? So we have some apocryphal texts that I know that you wouldn't consider to be accurate accounts of Jesus's childhood, where he was making birds out of clay and he killed one of his classmates. I would consider that to fit a criterion of embarrassment. So I don't think that alone is good, but it's a tool. It weighs in support of, but I think we have to weigh everything against that as well.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think that you brought up a good point, because I actually just recently read some of that apocryphal text and I read some of those different stories and I thought, wow, they, give them a little time. People come up with some really extraordinary stories. And
did you read Acts of Paul?
What's that?
Did you read Acts of Paul?
I don't remember. I read, which one was it? I don't think I read Acts of Paul. What's in that one?
The milky neck, Paul's milky neck.
Oh, that's why somebody was tweeting or somebody was saying something about that.
Yeah, it's the earliest account of Paul's martyrdom is in the Acts of Paul. And it says that when his head was cut off, when he was cut down, that milk came out of his neck and his head bounced 3 times. And each place that his head bounced, a freshwater fountain came up.
Wow. Yeah. So that's why, because somebody put something on milky neck, and I don't know if I'm coming through. It looks like I'm buffering here for some reason on my channel. Let me see if
yeah, everybody's saying that it's froze up.
I wonder if I shouldn't have 2 channels up. I should probably have this computer turned off. Let me just get this one. Okay. I'm going to turn this one off so I don't have the interference. Okay, so I have 1 channel off. Hopefully that'll come back. Let me see what this one says. Looks like it's still, it's working fine now?
Yeah, I think it's back.
Okay, good. Sorry, everybody, if I kind of ruined that conversation. Okay, so I'm going to go back to Jim here and ask, So you've read some of these other apocryphal texts, and yes, and I think that that's actually one of the things that's pretty important with the early church fathers, is they wanted to make sure that the people's the books that they did include in the canon were the ones that were the from eyewitnesses or from people who knew eyewitnesses. That was really important to them, because the stories were starting to get really far-fetched over time.
Well, and what was unfortunate is that the church fathers were able to stop the infesting canon for the most part, but they weren't able to keep it from infesting church tradition. So it still found its way into church tradition, such as Paul's the Tres Fontaines, the 3 freshwater fountains from Paul's head bouncing. That is church tradition.
Yeah. So I'm trying to switch my thing here. Sorry. Church tradition. Okay, I'll have to look into that. That's interesting that you bring that up. It looks like I'm still buffering on this thing. Is this?
And I believe it's also Acts of Thomas and quite a few of the other martyrdom accounts of the apostles are from apocryphal texts, or at least the earliest accounts.
Yeah, so I would say, I think, going back to your point, I think you brought up a couple of good things, and I think you're right. We can't just say that it's purely the embarrassment. There is the embarrassment factor, and I'd say that some of the other factors, that just to mention in case the crowd doesn't know some of the other embarrassing factors that are in there, one of them is that, and I've mentioned this before, and just that women were the ones who discovered the empty tomb. I know that's something people bring up a lot, but aside from that, what's even more embarrassing, I think, is the fact that Joseph of Arimathea is the one who's said to bury Jesus. And here he was a Sanhedrin. He was a member of the same group of people who ended up crucifying, or essentially wanting him to be crucified. And so that was kind of embarrassing. And also that the women were the ones who watched Joseph of Arimathea. Where were the men? Where were the men hiding out when all of this was going on? And I think that's kind of an interesting thing. It makes them look like kind of like a bunch of bumbling, these disciples. You can't even stick up for the guy and peek over the thing to see where Jesus is being buried.
Right. And I will agree with you that, Joseph of Arimathea, a member of the Sanhedrin, of the Jewish council, who had just previously been part of a unanimous vote to crucify Jesus, is now begging Pontius Pilate for favor so that he can get Jesus off the cross and give him to his family. And he apparently he does this, and this would be an extreme criterion of embarrassment. Again, weighed with everything else. But as far as the women goes, that I think is another one of those arguments that you don't really want to use, first of all, because there are so many problems with it. Because there are instances even in the Old Testament where men believe something solely based on a woman's testimony, and it's actually something that we would expect to find is Mary bringing the linens and the spices to wrap Jesus in, because the cleaning of the body and the wrapping and all the burial preparing process was done by women.
True. So I would agree with you. And I hadn't really gone into that so much to talk about the testimonies, but I think there is a point, because Josephus did mention something about women's testimonies not being quite as valuable as men's. So there is something there that's external to the Bible. But even so, it's a lot of times you'll notice it was a very masculine culture back then, and males were certainly the ones who were elevated quite a bit. And we didn't have what we have today with female equal rights and equal voting and everything else. So it was just a different society, probably similar to what we see in some Muslim societies today.
Right. So as far as Jesus's existence go, what do you think are like the basic things that we can say for sure are true about Jesus?
I think if we just took the extra biblical information and we looked at the minimal facts, as Gary Habermas likes to call it, and we looked at, okay, so we know that he was crucified, and that's actually going even against what Muslims say. So Muslims say that Jesus was born of a virgin and God took him to heaven before the crucifixion. And so that goes against what they say. But we say, okay, he was crucified. Jewish people also believe he was crucified. They just don't believe in his divinity. So we'll say he was crucified. He was buried in a tomb. On the third day, his disciples came out and told everybody that they had seen the risen Jesus. And then over a period of 40 days, they made claims that they saw the risen Jesus, and that others had seen the risen Jesus, including up to 500, according to 1 Corinthians 15. And then they, after that point, they started going out and preaching for decades to share the good news with everybody, even though they were being persecuted. And so we also have records of the persecution that are external to the Bible. So we have some of that kind of stuff too.
Right. But I think we would both agree that the scholarly consensus draws a line at one point in that argument, probably about the same place that I would draw it, right before the empty tomb, because I don't believe that there is any extra biblical evidence for that. In fact, when we look at the earliest writings of Christianity and the Pauline writings, Paul doesn't mention an empty tomb, which would have been one of the greatest pieces of evidence that he could have used to convince the people in Corinth, the people of the church in Corinth, that there was indeed going to be a bodily resurrection.
When do you think, and I know since you are kind of a Bible scholar and you have, you even mentioned that you're doing a little, I think you said Greek translations from some time for Baylor University. So you're doing some work on this kind of stuff. So what would you say is the earliest writing that's in the New Testament that Paul put out that was maybe one of the earliest creeds or beliefs?
I would say that probably from 1 Corinthians, there's some early creeds in there that nated the creeds themselves within, I'd feel comfortable saying, within 5 to 10 years of Jesus's death. But as far as the rest of the Pauline text, I think that's up for debate. Probably 25 years, 30 years.
Okay, yeah, I would say that's fair. So, and I think even Bart Ehrman has said that they've dated within 5 years for the creed of 1 Corinthians 15. And that basically, even though they didn't say it was an empty tomb, he certainly makes a case for Jesus appearing to him and appearing to Cephas and appearing to the 12, and then up to the 500. So he made this creed that they'd all memorized in the church. He put that on paper. And then over the period before he was beheaded finally by Nero, he was out there preaching and writing these books. So you're right, we don't have the dates, but we know that I think his beheading's anywhere between 62 and 64. So at least we know that a lot of his information had to have come out before that, because you can't write your stuff when you're beheaded.
Right. So I think that we're justified in saying that he was indeed beheaded, and that he was beheaded by Roman rule. He was, now whether or not he was brought to Jerusalem or to Rome, I think there's a little bit of confusion in there, especially with writing in First Clement. But so I think we're justified in saying that he was beheaded, but I don't think that we're justified in saying that milk came out of his neck. In other words, I don't think that just because it's in the text that it necessarily follows.
Right. I don't buy the idea of milk coming out from his neck either. I don't. Yeah. I reject, like the early church fathers, I reject all of the Gnostic books and all that other garbage that was written later. Although I guess there are some little truth factors in some of those from what I've heard. But
well, I mean, this is where they glean church tradition from. So I mean, they glean church tradition from these apocryphal texts.
Yeah, well, I would make a case that the Gospels were what they were mentioning is most important. Even in, like, if we go back to Justin Martyr, he's mentioning, I think it was around 150 or so, he mentioned the scriptures and had referenced the Gospels. And so I think that was actually the major books that were influencing people at that time.
No, I was specifically mentioning the Paul's beheading. Well, we can't glean that from the New Testament alone. We had to look at biblical sources. See so many extra biblical sources that while they can't agree on the year necessarily or the place that it happened, they all agree on the form of execution. So I think that we're perfectly justified in saying beheaded, yes. Milk fountains, no, but the milk in 3 fountains did make it into church tradition. So maybe they didn't find it compelling, but maybe they found it the supernatural claim to be maybe give it some weight. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think sometimes, well, if you look at the Catholic Church, a lot of things kind of got in there. At the beginning of the church, the idea was you're supposed to have a full body baptism, and the Catholic Church at some point realized that was sort of inconvenient, so they started baptizing just the top of the head of infants, essentially. And so they wanted to baptize people as early as possible. And if you go back and you look at the tradition of the baptism, that's not exactly how Jesus taught it. And so I was baptized twice. So I just want to cover my bases. I had to be baptized when I was an infant in the Catholic Church. And then when I had my born again experience, if you want to call it that, not too long ago. So.
Yep, baptized myself. I've been baptized and had evidence of my salvation by speaking in tongues. That was interesting.
Really, you spoke in tongues? How do you do that?
Mm-hmm.
That's
so
always
it's
baffled me.
There's a couple of different things that play into it. Of course, I think I've told you the analogy before, but it's basically Benny Hinn's jacket. You know, you have somebody at a Benny Hinn service and he swings his jacket at the crowd, and everybody on the left and the right of you, in front of you and behind you, fall out, but you will look less holy than everybody else. So you have to think, well, okay, so are all these people hallucinating or crazy, or some of them just psychologically tricked? I don't want to say tricked because it has such a negative connotation, but I don't know what you want to call it, but just convinced that this is the case.
Wow. Yeah, no, I haven't. I can honestly say I've never been in a service where I've seen that kind of stuff. And I have to admit that I'm quite skeptical of that because it seems,
right.
I mean,
yeah, because like you never go into a Baptist church and see somebody start running around the pews and go speaking in tongues.
No, if I saw that, I think I'd probably run the other way.
Right.
Like, no.
You don't see that happen outside of that church. Like you don't see people. In other words, so you don't see a person believing in or speaking in tongues who doesn't believe in speaking in tongues.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm very skeptical of that, and so I mean, you have to kind of be skeptical when you see this kind of stuff because you want to make sure, okay, I need to know the truth. If you're going to pretend that because if there are people who are pretending, well, then that's, I mean, what are you doing? Just if you.
Right,
So.
but there are some people who are convinced, but because of the psychological nature of it, they're just simply convinced.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
I don't think all of them are lying. I don't even think that most of them are lying. I think it's a smaller minority of them who are aware that it's not real. I think for the most part, the rest of them are convinced into it.
Yeah, you could so I guess I'll have to at some point in my life make a point to go into one of those churches just to get a feel for what that kind of message is, because I haven't seen it, and
I really would recommend it. I mean, just if not for the pure entertainment value.
You know, and just going back to this other point with the idea of traditions, I want to say another thing that I was raised in was with the Catholic faith. We had a lot of these different traditions and sacraments, like the idea that we're supposed to go and ask for forgiveness from a priest. There's an intermediary. And in my church, we don't have the priest or pastor as the intermediary. So that was another tradition that they kind of added in there to get people to attend church. And They had other things too, like they have this whole idea of Lent, and you're going to be fasting on Friday. That isn't something that was that wasn't something that was spelled out in the Bible. So that was an addition.
Well, we see some Judaic ideas, some First Temple and early Second Temple idea. Well, usually First Temple, starting around the area of the Levant, where the priest, does a sacrifice. The Azazel that's in Leviticus, the goat. That puts the sins of the community into the goat. So they do literally go to the priest for their sins. The priest puts the sins in the goat and then pushes them off the cliff. That's where the term scapegoat came from.
Really? I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Yeah.
That is really interesting. I'm gonna have to go. Poor little scapegoats. And your goats were so cute that you had.
There were two of them. One was set free in the wilderness, and the other one was pushed off a cliff.
Oh, that's terrible. That's just, oh, poor little goat. I mean, those little goats that you have are so cute. I don't think that.
Oh,
yeah.
I know. Like one of them, like I helped him take his first steps. He just wouldn't stand up. I can't imagine pushing him off a cliff. Like what?
No, I look at my dog too. And that's actually one of the reasons why I could very easily be a vegetarian, because if I had to go catch my own chickens and kill the actual chicken, I couldn't do it. There's no way. I would totally be a vegetarian. So there's no way. That would be hard. Although then again, I mean, I know there's, I guess I'm not a hunter either, which is a problem. I don't even like fishing because the hooks get caught in the fish mouth, and I feel bad for the fish when we have to pull it out. So let them go back into the thing with a big cut in their mouth. So
right.
it's
Right.
a
Or
little windy, I
if you
guess.
just chop off their head, you don't even see it.
Oh.
Oh no, I'm just.
Oh. That's another thing too, is when people serve you fish at a restaurant and they keep the head on. It's like, oh, come on. I don't want to see the eye. Anyway, going off on a crazy tangent. Okay, so I think you and I have established pretty fairly that Jesus is a historical figure. And I think that we've pointed a lot to a lot of reasons why. I think we talked about origins. We talked a little bit about embarrassment, but that's clearly not the only thing. And of course, then we talked about things like support for some of the persecution that occurred back then. And I think that even goes to Tacitus a little bit more too, because Tacitus referred to Nero and how Nero liked to deprade the Christians around or put them on
Right.
torches.
Yeah. Tacitus is the one who tells us that Nero's the one who blamed the Christians for the burning of Rome.
Yes. Yeah. So it's fascinating stuff, really. So, what do you do? What's your role as a VP of the Philosophical Atheists? I guess I don't know anything about that organization. So what do you guys do?
So it's mostly a board a board position. So just voting on budgets, events, things of that nature. Nothing too exciting. And it of course it does allow me for well, not just that, but other things that I've done in the past, other positions that I've held that kind of allow me into, I don't want to call it a speaking circuit, but it allows me to, I guess, to have that available to me, to where I am fortunate enough to be able to share my voice by traveling and speaking.
Yeah, that's interesting. Because I saw you at the Faithless Forum. I saw you in I think it was on Kyle's video or something.
I was about to say, I didn't see you, SJ. Where were you?
No, I wasn't there.
This is just like peeking around the corner.
Oh my gosh, I would never go there. I can only imagine. It's bad enough I have to have online interactions that can be kind of tense if I would have.
No, it would have been fine.
Running down a hallway.
No, it would have been fine. There's plenty of people like me who would have kicked the out of anybody who would have tried to turn that gathering, which was a great experience, into something like that. It's just not even worth it. You know who Ocean is, right? The polytheist.
Oh yeah.
He was there with us, hanging out with us.
I saw him. I saw Shannon Q and Paul, and who else was in that? Kyle. Right. I don't remember. There was the guy from England that everyone got mad at.
So like, I mean, if they were going to do anything to you for one God, like imagine what they do to you for more than one. Like they
with polytheists. Yeah. What did they do to Ocean? How'd they treat him?
Oh, it was great. It was great. We hung out all night until the wee hours of the morning, like we're not supposed to do. And yeah, we just had a really, really great time. And I mean, there was no atheist talk. There was no God debates. It was just friends hanging out and meeting each other for the first time. It was a really good experience.
Oh, that's interesting. I'm looking in the chats here, and I wanted to say, if anyone has a question for Jim or for me, but mainly for Jim, since he's the guest today, please put it in here and I'll be sure to ask him. So, we've got one already. so Slam RN, that's Susan. She wants to know, she said, could the church he grew up in be considered fundamentalist and or young earth? Fundamentalist, yes. Not necessarily young earth, but the majority of them did hold to young earth, yes. Okay. So, yeah, and there are a lot of people who support the young earth position. So I hesitate before I say much on being a young earther, but I don't hold to the young earth position, just in case anyone's wondering. I believe the earth is about 4.5 billion years old, in line with what science says.
Good for you, SJ. Heck yeah. Yeah, that's good. I like that.
So, I see you in the chat, Jim. Something.
Yeah. He was saying that he has goats as well. He has Nubians.
Oh, okay. So that's a type of goat. Interesting. Yeah. So
they're
I also
dairy goat.
Yeah. So are there any other events that you're going to be going to soon that might be up and coming? Because one of my coworkers actually is apparently a pretty big name, I guess, because he's presenting at this thing that's going to happen in Orlando at the beginning of November. I don't know if you're going to that particular one. I forgot what it was called, but.
No, I'm not. At the end of this month, actually in 6 days, I will be leaving for Israel to go on a speaking tour of Israel. It is me and a mom, a priest, and a Christian, and we will be doing a speaking tour just a little over a week.
Really? Now, how did that work out? How did you get in? This is a very strange, eclectic group. It sounds like almost like that joke of a priest and an atheist walk into a bar, right?
It started off as a joke. It started off as, because we were just all, it was basically a person like me, but in different religions. They can get along with everybody, until things go south, and then they and then things happen or whatever. They get upset, but so eventually we just all became friends. We started off in a group chat, talking crap about each other. And then we were like, hey, how great would it be, to just share views and to do this. And so it's just something that was organized. So it's, it's something I'm really excited about. It's been planned for like 2 years now. We've been planning on it. So it's nice to see it come to fruition.
Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah, you should take videos of yourself going around and
Yes.
looking at all the different sites there, because that's one place I would love to go. I have to admit, I would love to go there.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very excited. Like, I can't even tell you how excited I am.
Yeah, and it's only 6 days away. That's neat. So
yeah,
I'm going to a conference myself, but it's an academic conference, so it's not, and that's actually just in a few days too. So, but I'm not going to go very far. It's just in St. Pete Beach, and I'm right around the corner.
2, 3, 4, 5.
Oh,
sorry. It's 7 days. It's the 23rd, so it's a week from today. Okay.
Okay, good. That's exciting. So you've got that coming up. You've got some other activities. You've got a lot of animals at your place keeping you busy. So you just have a lot going on.
I have some debates coming up on Modern Day Debate. Debating Caleb. He's going to kick my butt for Cumberland is his last name. We're going to be debating on the reliability of church tradition. And I have another debate coming up with an unknown on Mosaic authorship or the existence of Moses. I can't remember which one.
Mosaic authorship. Now that's super interesting that you say that, because I just listened to a video this morning on Mosaic authorship. I forgot to tweet that out, but what's your take? Now, are you saying that Moses did not write the Pentateuch?
Yes, and not only that, I don't believe that Moses ever existed, and I mean that in a way that's more than they would say about Jesus, right? So like the people who would say that Jesus isn't like an amalgamation of different characters, that's what I would say about Moses. It's like Sargon of Akkad and a few other characters.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think I'm finding a lot of that kind of stuff lately, where people will just take something that we sort of take for granted and say, hey, that's not the truth. Like someone just to you on Twitter said, and I would actually argue, before I say this, I would argue that Moses did exist. And one of the major reasons is probably something that you won't agree with, but it's because Jesus said Moses existed. So to me, that's enough. That's all I need to hear.
Yeah.
But that's
well, and for the people who say that, I use the argument when people say that the Old Testament doesn't apply, that the Ten Commandments don't apply anymore. I was like, in Matthew, Jesus lays out what is called the antitheses, where he talks about the Bible and he says things like, Moses gave you your law, and Moses is your lawgiver, and you have to listen to Moses, and all these other things. And not only that, but Moses and Elijah appeared to him in a vision in front of the apostles, and at the the Transfiguration.
right. Yeah.
And so, I mean, of course, Jesus, obviously, at least at the very least, believed in Moses. At the very least.
Yeah. So Jesus did. So why don't you?
well, I don't know if that follows, but
because I got caught you off guard. I was like, what? No, but even somebody was saying on Twitter, I was noticing on your feed, somebody was saying, well, I don't know about Nazareth being a real place. And I said, well, I listened to Inspiring Philosophy's video on Nazareth being a real place and archaeology. He's got some archaeological support, but I think to myself, now, why would they even make up Nazareth? Why wouldn't they just say Bethlehem? Because it said in Micah that Jesus was to be coming from Bethlehem. So why would Nazareth even be in the picture? And I even thought about Nathaniel saying, does anything good come from Nazareth? So I would think that wouldn't even be a point to argue, but for some reason, people pick these things that I think are givens, and they say, well, I don't know about that. So that's
Yeah, I think there's a lot of reasons to suggest that there was a place called Nazareth, but I don't think there's any definitive evidence that we can say that there was. As far as archaeological evidence, I think we can trace it back to about the third century CE of the Common Era, or AD. But there is archaeological evidence of other pre-existing settlements that are older than that. They consider the 300 BC a new a new city. It's supposed to be a new build of that. So now, but there's no archaeological evidence of what this other place is called. So we're just operating under the assumption that it's the same name.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's, to me, it seems like one of those kind of tangential issues that I don't really consider that important, but it's interesting when people start saying, well, wait a second, what about this? And I got in a big dispute with Tim O'Neill about Quirinius and about the dating for Herod the Great. And we went back and forth on that a little bit. So that was fun.
Let me guess, did it end up on the type of tax? Like whether or not it was a tax that was necessary for everybody to come to the place of their forefathers.
I think I don't remember. He didn't. I don't think he ended up with that. See, his basic argument is he's looking at the two versions, Luke versus Matthew, and the idea from Luke, as we talk about Quirinius, and the assumption, or one assumption that a lot of people have had, is that Quirinius basically took his census in 6 AD, and the other discussion is the idea of Herod in Matthew, who some have estimated has passed away in 4 BC based on something that Josephus said. And so I actually went back and I looked at scholarship on this kind of stuff, and I found someone who looked at Josephus's work, and this person found a lot of internal inconsistencies in Josephus's books in dating. So he wasn't terribly neat about dating. And so I was making a case that there is the possibility that Herod could have died later. And another scholar thought there's a possibility that maybe the reference isn't to Herod the Great, but is a reference to Archelaus. And so Herod Archelaus, because they could also maybe call him the same. So I looked at these things to just put down a couple of plausible chances that there could be a situation where Herod died in maybe 1 BC, and then a lot of this other stuff would actually fit, because in 2 BC there was something that they called the Silver Jubilee, and it was a big celebration where they actually took a registration of all of the people who lived in the Roman Empire to celebrate this 750th commemoration of Rome. So that was something that was interesting.
Well, and I'll give you another one. And you can use this argument. It's a really good argument. Is that before Quirinius, but then it would take you saying that they're wrong about it being the census of Quirinius, that it really was the census of Augustus, which did occur around the year 2 to 4. So that would help you with the dating, but it would require saying that one of the synoptic gospels got the origin of the tax wrong, which doesn't have any salvatory implications, but it's still kind of cringy.
Yeah. So there's a lot of different arguments. I think a lot of times people want to look into the Gospels and they want to try to find what they consider errors. But I think I have yet to find something that I think is a true error. So maybe that's just me, but I don't think that there's anything that's irreconcilable. If you can find a plausible theory that could explain some of the things that seem like contradictions, I think that then we know that it's not necessarily a provable contradiction. So.
Right. Well, I have my own, opinions about that, and we would be here all day if we try to get into them. So I think we can save that for another video.
Yeah, no, that's fair. So let me ask you this: where were you? How have you been in any of these internal? Actually, I don't know if I should even bring this up, but the Steve Kyle thing. Did you ever take sides on that, or are you just kind of hanging out on the side? I'm not taking sides. I'm not dealing with this sort of thing. So
with the non sequitur thing.
Yeah.
Well, so I'm not a bandwagon person. You won't see, and not that that some of these bandwagons aren't for good reasons, or they don't help people. It's just not me. So you won't see me with a pumpkin next to my name. You won't see me, being on somebody's team. I think that dogmatic positions of every kind are bad. And even if they aren't bad at that moment, it's just bad to hold them dogmatically. So I think that Steve is in the right. I think that Kyle is wrong. I think that Steve should get what he is owed, and I think that that Kyle should get what he is owed, if you know what I mean. Just all around, my argument from the very beginning has been, I just hope that everybody gets what they deserve.
Yeah, fairness. I think that's fair. And actually, I agree with you on those positions too, because I think that Steve's out some money, and he clearly started that channel with Kyle. So that's just in case anyone doesn't know, that's what we're talking about. But so let me ask you one other thing. And I don't know if you've taken a position on this kind of thing, but do you take a position on whether morality is objective, whether we have objective moral values and duties, or do you think that it's relative to cultures? Or do you think it's a mix?
I think it's more likely that they are objective, or that there are some objective ones. I don't believe that we can say that morality period is objective. I believe that we can say that some morals may be objective. But I don't think that there's any definitive evidence to say for sure. And I don't think that we would ever know, epistemically, when we have achieved that morality. So even if we were operating under true morality, I don't think that we would ever be able to perceive of it being true.
Yeah, I think, and I'll agree with you to some extent. I think that our societies have been sort of evolving towards a better, higher morality for a couple of thousand years at least. And so people just seem to be getting a little bit better year after year as far as trying to get closer to an ideal. That's what I would say I mean, it seems if we go back far enough, we saw what they did in the medieval times, for example, when they just would torture people so horribly, and beheading people and hanging people in the streets, and bodies everywhere. I look back, I'm just so thankful I didn't live back then, because I'd be pretty horrified.
It's like, guys, like you can get things done. You can spread ideas without killing people. Like, hey, we got this thing called a vote.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, really, really unique. But yeah, so we have, I think that we can say that we've been steadily and slowly trying to get a little bit better as societies. And I think Western societies have really shown a lot of improvements over the past couple of thousand years, especially with how women are treated in such a positive way, I think, in so many of our societies. So.
Yeah, I think some of the most extreme ones that, I mean, have been within the past 100 years, the past 50 years, even. I think the last 100 years, or even the past 50 years, is the acceleration that we've seen is just insane.
Yeah. Yeah. And do you listen to people like Jordan Peterson?
I do. I really do like some of his views, but he is just the kind of person that he is, just says some things, and I just can't listen to him, honestly. Now, if he were to write a scholarly paper, I would read it. But I can't listen to his diatribe.
I like him because I like his stuff on psychology, and I think you'd probably like that too. It's fascinating. He does a lot of work on personality characteristics and things like that, and I find that really fascinating. And I loved the interview he had with that one woman who kept trying to mischaracterize everything he said. Kathy Newman, I think her name was. I don't know if you saw that, but it's hilarious. But then he's interesting though too, because he talks about, you ask him if he believes in God, and he basically will go into like this really long-winded answer that doesn't really hit the point. He doesn't really say yes or no. He said, I live like I believe in God. And then then he's like, but then how do you define God? And he'll start going down this big path, a rabbit hole. And so he's just a unique person. But I brought him up because
Wait,
I
Ben
think
Fisher?
What's that?
Ben Fisher?
Fisher?
Ben Fisher?
No, not Ben Fisher. Jordan Peterson. I guess.
Okay. I think you said Ben for some reason.
Oh no, I brought Jordan Peterson up just because I think that he might be. I mean, if I had to look at some of the different movements, and I look at people like Adam Friended, who's listening and doing a lot of videos on Jordan Peterson, and I think that he might be pulling some people away from the Sam Harris camp. That's my opinion. Do you admire or listen to any of the, and I know you already said you're not a bandwagon type, and you definitely don't just go with the, you're not going to say, okay, I'm just going to follow him or anything like that. But are there any atheists that you think have really compelling messages these days? Because there have been people who've said, well, I think that in the past, Bertrand Russell and Nietzsche were very sophisticated people who had a lot of sophisticated opinions. But in today's day, a lot of people have this view of the new atheists, for example, and they kind of feel like they aren't as sophisticated as the atheists of the past. Do you think there are any who are kind of on the level of a Nietzsche or a Bertrand Russell today?
Right.
Besides yourself, of course.
Well, so I hold certain atheists to be respected in certain areas, but only in areas where they are worthy of that respect. So within their own respective fields, for example. But I wouldn't say that they themselves, I see all their arguments as good arguments. I can't think of any one atheist that I just agree with across the board. But I mean, if we're talking like, individual arguments or individual schools of thought, like, yeah, there are a certain, it's like even people like Bart Ehrman, I disagree with on some points. So I can't say that, I think his arguments are good, just flat out.
Yeah. So if you had to take one, if you had to put somebody up against William Lane Craig in a debate, and I'll ask him for William Lane Craig because a lot of people, including Lawrence Krauss, have said that he puts the fear of God in atheists. And so if you had to put one of the people who are out there sort of talking a lot and debating people, which one do you think you'd put out?
I would absolutely love to debate William Lane Craig.
Really?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, wow. That's interesting. I wonder if we can arrange that.
100%. I think he's a great speaker. And I think that the way that I think a lot of people present his arguments and have presented his arguments before him, but I think the way that he presents them is, or was at the time when he was, when he started doing it, it was revelational, I guess you could say. People were shocked. They were like, what do we do with this? But I think that it's a debate that I'm more than ready to have, and I would love for that to happen.
Oh, that's interesting. So are there any other people? I guess I asked you about influential atheists, and I'll say of the Christians that I would say William Lane Craig is probably one of our best debaters out there. So to go up against him would be, I would think it would be a challenge for people, but
certainly a challenge, no doubt.
Yeah. So he's one of the best. And then I think I've seen Bart Ehrman debating people like Mike Licona, and I've seen other people debating, but I'd say probably if I had to pick out of all of them, William Lane Craig's probably up there on the top and influencing everybody else. So yeah. Who do you think, are there any other Christians that are kind of famous now that you think would be, oh yeah, John Lennox is Susan's mentioning. Do you think there are any others that you would be willing to debate besides, or who you think might be challenging too, would present a good challenge?
Like to me, does it have to be Christians or can it be Jews?
It could be Jews too. Yeah, why not?
I think Heiser gives a lot of good stuff. Michael Heiser. Yeah. You thought I was going to say Singer, didn't you?
Peter Singer? Oh my gosh, I
actually can't stand Tobias Singer.
Tobias Singer. Oh my, yeah. You were going to Jewish people. No, who'd be the most challenging Jewish person, I think, in a debate, and I would never debate this guy because I'm not insane, would be Ben Shapiro.
Ben Shapiro?
Have you listened to him?
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, he's a weasel.
He would be really hard to debate though, because he's
a weasel.
He's these little zingers out there.
Oh, so. Yeah. Kent Hovind will not debate me again, SJ. He will not debate me. He refuses to debate me.
Really?
Yep.
Well, somebody said that Kent Hovind wouldn't debate on my channel because somebody was trying to come onto my channel and debate Kent Hovind, and they contacted Kent's secretary and said that he doesn't want to go on your channel. And I'm like,
I told him I would do it on any channel, and he said that he doesn't want my filth on his channel, and that any channel that I would have wanted on is biased.
Really?
Yeah, and I even brought up yours.
Wow. Yeah, he wouldn't, because he told somebody that he wasn't going to come on or he didn't say it. I think the secretary said it. And I've only had him on my channel once, and it was when he was debating Joel Edmund Anderson, who he was a Christian. And so Joel is an old earth Christian, and they were going back and forth about Genesis. And so it was, I mean, I thought I was pretty fair and balanced, but maybe I wasn't. So maybe I should probably listen to that and see if I was fair. Maybe I weren't very fair. So I said Ben Shapiro is probably an influential person. Tobias Singer, Rabbi Tobias Singer, I listened to a couple of his videos, and I feel like he just lies, but maybe that's just me.
Well, he has an agenda. I mean, his whole foundation, the thing that he teaches from, it necessitates one view. So he's very dogmatic in thinking, because if he was to ever stray away from it, if he was to ever say Psalm 22 wasn't about Jesus, or Isaiah 53 wasn't about Jesus, or Daniel 7 and 9 weren't about Jesus, then he'd be done. That's him.
Yeah. Oh, that's his whole thing. He's always talking about
Right.
how those.
Well, it would be like if Richard Carrier stopped Jesus mythicism, he'd be done.
You're right. He's built his whole career on that. I was thinking about that too, because at one point I heard Richard Carrier say that, I think he said it was a third chance or 2/3 of a chance that Jesus might actually be an historical figure. And so I thought, well, that's interesting, because he wrote his book on not being historical. So, but yeah, if you build your whole case on one thing, and I'm impressed actually, Jim, that you actually have those verses memorized. Daniel 7, Daniel 9, Psalm 22. You only missed Zechariah 12:5 if you want to, or 12:10 if you want to add one more to the group
and
that are similar to
Zechariah
Isaiah
9:9, Hosea 11:1.
Oh, nice. Malachi 3:1.
Yep. Yeah. Oh, I don't know all 330, but
Oh, you even know the number. This is pretty good.
The current number, yeah.
That's interesting. So yeah, no one's going to challenge you on your Bible knowledge. I think you do have a pretty good background. So why did you?
Well, thank you.
I noticed I was mentioning this on Twitter. So at one point, you and I kind of had a little bit more of a hostile relationship, and lately it seems like we have a much nicer relationship. So why did you decide to be so nice? I think I put that down to you, because you're like, I'm just want to be a good friend or be a friendly person. I think that was
right.
That's
I don't think it was hostile. I think it had a lot to do with Twitter's limited character amount and me trying to make a succinct argument and not being able to within those confines. So with me lashing out a little bit irrationally and being a jerk, as we all tend to do sometimes. But I always have and I always will think that the best way to a productive conversation is to do what we're doing right now. Whether we agree or disagree, it's important that we have the conversation.
I think so too. I think that's a good point, because I think when people think it's my group versus their group, and it's always the in group versus the out group, I think a lot of times that if you don't get to know anybody in these other groups, how are you ever going to understand their viewpoints? And instead they end up being stereotypical. And
a lot of them have the nerve to say that it's not true, and without even bothering to try to understand it.
Yeah, so I think that's important. I think it is important that's one of the reasons why I have a bridge in my YouTube video screens. I have this bridge because the idea is to have a bridge between different groups and bring them together. So that's one of the reasons I have that.
Absolutely.
And I would say, I see Slam Arena saying Twitter brings out the best. Maybe no. I'd say Twitter is almost like a dumpster fire half the time. It's like a microcosm of hell. I really think it's awful. But right. I don't know why I go on there still. It's terrible. I'm trying to figure out.
Well, yeah, I've long said, that theism and atheism has always been and probably will always be fenced off from each other. But there's nothing saying that we can't put a gate in.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I probably have mentioned this, but when I first got onto Twitter, I honestly didn't know. I mean, I knew one atheist was my husband's uncle, but he passed away not too long ago. And so I knew him, and this is in 2016, I became a little bit more active on Twitter, and I really didn't know any other atheists. I just knew of atheists. And so this has been a big learning experience for me. So I've gotten to know a lot of people, and some haven't worked out so well and some worked out better. So that's a good thing. Oh yeah, Craig Reed is in here too. Let me say hi to a few people. Blue Collar Heathen, Science for Life, Susan, Craig Reed. Just want to say hi because they're in the chat. So if anyone wants to ask a question of Jim, feel free to go ahead and I'll ask him it.
Except Craig.
Except Craig. Craig, you're not allowed to. Sorry. Everyone else can say something. So no, that's good. So let me ask you this. What are your plans? Like, where do you see yourself in the next 5 years? Do you have any sort of big dreams to build on what you're doing today?
Yeah, I want to, and this sounds incredibly egotistical, but just to be completely honest with you, I want to be known for my my extreme lack of bias in my writings. I want to be known for my books. I want to be known for studies. I want to be known as a good resource, and not as Jim the atheist, or as Jim the ex evangelical, or as Jim the guy with an agenda, but as Jim the guy who offers all the data from both sides.
Craig wants to know if you call your mustache the babe magnet.
You're the only one who calls that. I don't know.
It's so funny. No, I think I think that's a good goal, because one of the things I do, one of the MBA classes I teach, we actually have everyone watch a video on the big why from Simon Sinek. And the idea is that you try to think about, well, what's your purpose? Where do you see yourself? And it's actually the idea of setting goals and looking into the future and saying, well, in 5 years, I'd like to have X, Y, and Z done. And so I think it's good that you recognize that, you want to be a well-known author, and you want to write books, and you want to be known for no biases, or mitigated biases. We should probably say everyone has a little bit of bias. But
right. I want somebody to be able to pick up my book and read it without knowing anything about me and going, dang, is he an atheist or a Christian? And if you go through my Twitter, it's a good feeling when somebody asks me that, when I just get finished having a biblical debate and they say, hey, is Jim atheist or Christian? That is a compliment to me.
Oh, yeah. Well, you could be like Friend did and call yourself a Christian atheist. That's what he calls himself now.
Well, yeah, but I don't agree with all the teachings of Jesus, but that's for another story.
That's what I saw on there. He actually set up a poll to find out what his followers, what their religious background was. And one of the options was Christian atheist. I thought, what's a Christian atheist? He said that's where he is. So
a cultural Christian, right?
I think that's what it is. He was raised in a Christian family. And so I think that's where he's,
well, it's kind of like a non-practicing Jew who would still celebrate Hanukkah or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Or could be even an atheist who still celebrates Christmas in a way, the cultural idea.
Yeah. I still celebrate Christmas. I just don't look at it as Christian. Everybody, I mean, we can look at Christianity from different perspectives and we can glean something off of it. And while I once knew it as a Christian holiday, now my knowledge, everything that tells me, I can no longer put myself back in my old, understanding of the holiday. Like I know too much, SJ.
See, I think you and I have the exact opposite opinions. It's crazy as far as that stuff. I feel like the more I learn, the more it strengthens my faith, as strange as that sounds. And I do read atheist books too. It's not that I'm trying to keep myself away from that information. I open it up. I'll read it all. Just bring it on.
That's great. That's great. And what's great is that you don't stop. Like you're not like, okay, I'm going to close this book. Like this book right here was the last one. Like I'm good after this. It's important that after that book you say, well, what about this?
I agree. I think that people should read probably at least one book a week. And I do read at least one book a week. And I think it's important because you need to keep learning. You should never stop learning. It's, no matter what you're learning, just find something you're interested in and just keep, digging in and getting more information. So speaking of books, what are your books going to be about, or what do you already have these books?
They're going to be breaking down important topics such as the historicity of Jesus, the authorship of the synoptic gospels, the Christology in the different gospels. I want to touch on some things in Old Testament, not really the arguments between allegorical and literal, but rather the arguments from multiple tradition, multiple creation accounts, multiple flood accounts, and really providing more of that literature. But I wanted to provide it in a way that it's available to everybody. I don't know if you feel the same way, but I feel like a lot of the scholarly work in the biblical community is really hard to access. It's like it's not for everybody.
It is. You're right. I find a lot of this stuff. I'll go into our academic library at school and I can get access to a lot of different journal articles. And I did that yesterday, actually, because I wanted to find as much as I could on Quirinius. And I know that there's paywalls up there. People can't get that stuff. And so the highest level information is not accessible to a lot of people unless you want to pay. And so I think that's a problem. And I love the idea of providing material free or just even providing it so that it's accessible and it's not going to cost you an arm and a leg to get it. You think that's pretty fair?
Yeah, more than fair. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that, and so you mentioned Bart Ehrman, because I think that Bart Ehrman he's got a website, but then when you want to get into his website, the good stuff, I guess, is kind of behind a paywall. So I think it's more ideal to open it up. And so that's one thing that I think is good. And so it's interesting. So you have these, are you going to get, and I don't know what kind of educational background you have, but since you want to write on Bible sorts of topics, are you going to get a theology degree or anything like that if you haven't already gotten one?
Yeah. So currently working on dual masters and New Testament studies, biblical studies with a focus on New Testament studies, and biblical studies with a focus on ancient Near East studies and biblical Hebrew. And then I'm going to pursue a doctorate in biblical studies with a focus on New Testament. The New Testament is really where I want to stay. But by this time next year, I'll have my master's.
You're like Chris. I'm forgetting. Oh, Chris Hansen, the biblical history skeptic. Do you know him? Mm-hmm. He has the same kind of desires. So that now why would it, and I guess this sounds like a bad question, but I don't get why, if you're an atheist, why do you want to go study the Bible? I don't get that.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's like, I don't know, like the same reason why people would want to study like the Iliad or the Odyssey, you know, it's just, well, for one, culturally, the Bible is important to me because it was important to me on a totally different level than it is now. So it's you know, I don't know. It's kind of like that notebook that you have from high school with that person that you dated that you don't like anymore, but you still keep it around because you can look at it and you can get good memories, but you learn a whole lot more about that person. But it's more than that. I just enjoyed. I've always enjoyed Bible study. I've always enjoyed the challenge, and I see no reason to start over with something else just because along the way I lost my belief.
That's interesting. So, because I can think of a few examples, not even just you, of people who are atheists who really enjoy the Gospels and who just enjoy the Bible itself as whatever way you look at that book. And so that's really fascinating. And I didn't know you had these aspirations to earn a doctorate in this stuff. I don't think you've ever told, or at least I've never heard you say that. So that's a lot of work.
Dr. Majors. I want to be Dr. Majors. Heck yeah.
Dr. Major. It's a real lot of, because actually a master's, I mean, I'll just say from my own experience, when I earned an MBA, I think it was like an extension of undergraduate. It wasn't really that hard, but the PhD kind of kicked me. That's what I hear.
And the master's has been easy thus far. And like I said, by this time next year, I'll have them. And so, I mean, it's been relatively easy, but I think it's only been relatively easy because of all of the work that I went through willingly without having to be told to or having to be given assignments. Like these are things that I was already pursuing. So don't tell my professor, but for many of them, I don't study.
I'll keep that quiet. Yes, you don't want the professor to know that. He needs to step up the game a little bit, right?
Right. It's like, Jim Majors, are you taking notes? Yeah, totally taking notes.
Yeah, well, if you do well on the test and you didn't have to take notes, that says something right there. So.
I think so. Yeah. I've been a good test taker my whole life, but at the same time, I always had to like recheck myself, you know, and be like, you know, even though you're not going to study for the test, listen to the lecture. You might be presented with new information.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. Let me ask you because we're getting we've gone a little over an hour now, and I think we've had a pretty healthy conversation, but I always ask atheists this, have you ever had any spiritual experiences that you would say before maybe you went to, that you would classify as spiritual, or maybe now you're looking back on it and you say, well, I don't think that's what really happened. You ever had anything like that?
I have some beliefs, some events in my life that I would have considered to be spiritual. But now I feel like that there's no good reason to believe that that was the case. And I think that there is some good justification to believe that other things could have caused that, things such as speaking in tongues, what we would call in the Pentecostal church, receiving the Holy Spirit or receiving the Holy Ghost, church camp, you know, the church camp queasies, you know, things of that nature. And then just, of course, you know, your average Sunday morning worship service.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. So sometimes you do have those experiences on Sundays too. So that's
Right.
interesting. And then, so let me ask you this: is there anything that could change your mind at this point? Now, people could ask me that. They say, "Is there something that could change my mind about Christianity?" And I would say, "Well, yeah. If you proved the resurrection didn't occur, well, then
Mhm.
that's mainly what Christianity stands on." So, uh,
Sure.
would there be anything that would change your mind that today, that if you heard about or you read about, you'd say, wait a second, maybe I need to think about that.
In regards to the proposition that Christianity is true and that Jesus was raised from the dead?
Yes.
Yeah, I guess I would need something that we could definitively say is eyewitness evidence, multiple attestations that were eyewitnesses, and we would have to have good reason to believe that that it was an eyewitness source, and it would be in a text that shouldn't come off as though it was written later. Yeah, so I guess just better evidence than what we currently have. I mean, we for Christianity, for non-apostle Christianity, it's 20, 30 years, and for just regular or for apostolic Christianity, there's a traditional break of half a century to a century. So I mean, it's really, really hard to say, yes, I believe this, even though I know, and I know for a fact that there's this break in tradition, or in what some people call apostolic succession, that I can't justify my belief that is true, other than just taking somebody at their word that it was passed down from the apostles.
Yeah, I think it's really a good thing that you're probably going to go in and study this kind of stuff, because I think that at least you'll come to a very well evidenced background, or a very well evidenced idea with that, since
Yeah.
you're going to go into that. And even the idea that you're going to Israel next week, which is
Right.
pretty
Right.
great. So you're going to actually, I always thought it'd be an interesting field to go into archaeology, because I think that if you could go do a little archaeology in Israel, that would be a good time.
Yeah, a lot of good people have, well, and a lot of bad people too have done some archaeology in Israel. But I really like the history of archaeology in Israel, and learning about all the archaeologists, and learning about all of their ideas. Like, some of them, were believe it or not, like, I wouldn't call them white supremacists, but they believe that the Caucasian was a superior race, and that there is archaeological evidence to suggest it.
Yeah, that's really bad. That's a
Yeah,
Hitlerific. That's a
yeah.
Hitlerific statement. So, and I use that word because it was in a David Letterman book. It's words that are never put together. So it's just
Yeah.
ridiculous. But
Or wait, what was it? Arsenal Koitai, also two words never put together.
yeah, I see G-Man in the chat. I wanted to say, yeah, it's just crazy. I see G-Man in the chat. I want to say Reformed Christian apologists and G-Man are going to be on my channel tomorrow. So I don't want to forget to mention that. So thank you for coming by, G-Man. It'll be really exciting. I'm actually not exactly sure of what you're going to be debating with Reformed Christian apologists, but we're going to keep it on a good level. It's a friendly conversation, and and a good time. So I hope everyone will come by tomorrow night for that. I think it's at 7, if I'm not mistaken. I'll have to double check my timing, but just plug that out there. So I've watched G-Man on different debates, and they've always been, oh, wait, hold on. It's not going to be, it's actually Thursday at 6:30 p.m., not tomorrow. So
Are you moderating it, or?
yes, I'm going to moderate it.
Oh,
So
bless your
should be
heart.
interesting. Thursday, the 19th at 6:30. Should be a good
I'm
time.
sorry.
So anyway, Jim, before we tie up here, did you want to make any other final notes or final things? I think you and I, we have to agree to disagree as far as religion, but I mean, we do agree to disagree as far as Christianity, but we both agreed that there is an historical Jesus.
Yeah, I think that history, archaeology, textual criticism, all of these things, they transcend religion. History and archaeology it's not exclusive to true claims. If 2,000 years from now, the only thing that they had to glean off of our existence was Spider-Man comics, as Aaron Raw likes to use that that kind of analogy, even if they had just that, and they found New York City from the Spider-Man comics, and they said, we found this civilization. Well, it doesn't follow then that Spider-Man is real. So yes, I believe that Jesus is historical, that Jesus did exist, that he was baptized by John the Baptist, that he led a following of people around southern Judea, that they at least believed that he was the Messiah, and he was killed by Pontius Pilate for his claim that he was king of the Jews, or for a claim that he was king of the Jews. Past that, I don't think that we have any good justification to claim that anything else happened. I know that SJ believes that there is justification to believe more, but even on just these basic fundamentals, no supernatural attributions required. Just, you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And that's what I did early as an atheist. I got as far away from Jesus as I could. And I said, well, if this part was wrong in the Bible, then I'm just going to throw out the whole Bible. The whole Bible's wrong. And it's important to remember that the Bible is a combination of many texts from many people over a long period of time. And it's important to take everything in context.
You're right. That actually is a great point. I just want to build on that real quick. So just in case people don't know, it's 66 books by 40 or more authors over 1,500 years in 3 continents and 3 languages. And it all remarkably comes together in a very cohesive manner to point to Jesus. I have to say that. And I also wanted to say one thing, just to build on one of your points, is when you look back at Jesus and the beginning of this Christian movement, I think if you think to yourself, well, how did a fisherman and a tent maker and a tax collector and carpenter, how did all these people come together to be able to inspire a movement that today has around 2 billion followers? How is this even possible? And why didn't this movement die down like Gamaliel predicted it would when he mentioned it in Acts 5 and with the other Pharisees when they were putting Peter up on trial? And so I think that I would say that there's some divine inspiration in that whole thing. And even looking at what the apostles said, you know, and going back to what somebody said, I think it was Chuck Colson was talking about how people during Watergate, these guys weren't able to keep a lie, you know, for a couple of weeks, let alone if they thought they had a lie, why would they do this for decades and be willing to be jailed and stoned and torched and beheaded and crucified and all that kind of stuff if they didn't believe that Jesus resurrected?
And I won't refute that. That's a different argument for a different day. I know we're getting close on time.
Yeah. Okay. Well, anyway, I want to say thank you so much, Jim. And I'm glad you and I are friends. I'm glad you came on my channel. It's nice to see the viewpoints of different people with different views. And I haven't had an atheist on my channel a long time. In fact, I even had one yesterday who said, could I take her video off the channel?
Oh, geez.
Yeah. So that's a harsh thing. You know, I was with her. I thought we had a really nice conversation. It was about a year ago. And so she said she didn't want to be associated with me anymore. And I thought, gee, okay, well, no problem. I'll take it off. So, but I'm going to keep your video up because I think we've had a nice friendly conversation, and I think we should have bridges between people and to understand each other's viewpoints. And I think you probably have a big, really good future ahead of you, earning your PhD and being Dr. Majors. I think that's great stuff.
Thank you so much, SJ. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. So, all right, everybody, we'll say thank you, and please like and subscribe and come again. And I'm going to go ahead and end this meeting. So, meeting. Okay, Jim, I guess I'll end the meeting, and I will see you on Twitter at some point, okay?
All right, SJ, have a good one.
Okay, bye-bye.